Hello everyone, today we are diving into something you've probably seen, but maybe never fully understood. The mysterious little creatures lined up along the rooftops of ancient Chinese architecture. Some look like dragons, some like lions, some like birds, and some you might not even be able to name them. At first glance, they might seem like simple decorations, just ornamental details. But in traditional Chinese architecture, the roof ridge is much more than just a structural part of the building. It carries rich cultural symbolism and reflects a strict social hierarchy. The number of these rooftop beasts, the shapes, their exact positions, even the materials they are made from, were all carefully chosen, following precise rules that mirrored the feudal ranking system of ancient China. In other words, these little roof creatures weren't placed randomly. They were a visible code of status and power, built right into the architecture itself. So today, we are going to uncover the fascinating secrets behind these roof beasts. This topic is packed with details, and I guide you through each part step by step, making sure you clearly understand what every piece means and represents. By the end of this video, you will be able to read the rooftop like a cultural map, decoding the symbolism, the hierarchy, and the ancient wisdom embedded in these tiny guardians of the sky. Alright, let's get started. So first, let's start by asking, what exactly are these roof beasts for? In ancient Chinese architecture, these creatures weren't just decorative. They had a very practical origin. Originally, they served to hold down the roof tiles, keeping them from being blown away by the wind or loosened by rain. Ancient roofs were mostly made of tiles, and to prevent them from shifting or leaking, heavy objects were often placed along the roof ridges and corners. Over time, these practical ways evolved into elaborate figures, these mythical beasts that are both functional and beautiful. And with their presence becoming more and more prominent on rooftops, they gradually took on meanings that went beyond utility. They became symbols of architectural hierarchy. Only the imperial family or important temples were allowed to use them. Ordinary houses couldn't just put them up freely. Besides marking status, these roof beasts carried rich cultural symbolism, warding off evil, preventing fires and disasters, bringing good luck, and reflecting social order and respect. The designs drew inspiration mainly from ancient Chinese mythology, like the strange beasts in the classic of mountains and seas, and the widely known 9 sons of the dragon from folklore. Now that we understand their purpose, let's start take a look at what these beasts were actually made of. Most of them were crafted from glazed tiles called liuli. These glazed ceramic pieces were fired at high temperatures, producing bright, vivid colors and a tough, waterproof finish. In ancient times, liuli symbolized nobility and high status. But not every building could afford or was allowed to have these glazed tile beasts, because making liuli was costly and difficult. It itself became a symbol of architectural rank. Only buildings of high status could use liuli roof beasts. And as the rank increased, so did the quality, color, and detail of the glaze. For example, the Forbidden City in Beijing used the highest grade, fully yellow glazed tiles, shining bright gold, symbolizing imperial supremacy. In contrast, ordinary government offices or temples might use green or blue glazed tiles, or sometimes just simple unglazed ceramic tiles. So, where exactly were these beasts placed on the roofs? According to traditional architectural regulations, these small mythical creatures are collectively known as ridge beasts. They are placed along the most important ridges of the roof, typically including the main ridge at the very top, the slanting ridge that extended down from the center, the diagonal ridges at the roof's corners, and even on the outermost corner rafters under the eaves. In the next part, we'll explore these ridge bases by looking at where they stand along the roof. Let's begin at the very top, right along the main ridge, the highest line of the roof. At both ends of this ridge stand two mighty figures, impossible to miss once you notice them, with their mouths wide open and their gaze fixed forward. They tower over the roof like powerful guardians. They are often called the kings of the ridge base, protecting the building from above. So, who exactly are these mighty beasts? Well, that's where things get even more fascinating. Over thousands of years, and across different dynasties, the earliest known origin of these ridge beasts dates back over 2,000 years to 104 BCE during the Han Dynasty. At that time, Emperor Wu of Han ordered the construction of a grand palace, the hall of cypress beams, to host a lavish royal banquet. It was meant to showcase the power of the empire, but not long after it was completed, devastating fire reduced it to ashes. A glorious vision gone in an instant. In the aftermath, a court author offered a mystical idea. He claimed that in the Eastern Sea lived a strange fish with a tail shaped like an owl's wings. This mystical creature, he said, could summon wind and rain and spit water to put out fires. Inspired by this legend, artisans began placing sculptures of the beast at both ends of the main ridge, hoping to ward off fire and disaster. This was the birth of the Chiwei, the sacred bird-tail finial. From that moment on, the Chiwei began to evolve. By the Mid-Tang Dynasty, around 1,200 years ago, its basic shape had formed, a lower half resembling a dragon or crocodile's head, and an upper half that curled inward like a tail, together creating a long, rectangular silhouette. This design deeply influenced roof decorations for centuries to come. By the Jin Dynasty, roughly 900 years ago, the Chiwei grew more dynamic, its body twisted like a dragon, claws outstretched, full of life and motion. Then, in the Yuan Dynasty, about 750 years ago, the shape began to curve outward more dramatically, and its name started to change. It was now called the Chiwen. Fast forward to the Ming and Qing dynasties, from about 600 to just 100 years ago, and the transformation became even more pronounced. The Chiwen curved fully outward, forming a spiral disc-like shape, its proportions more square than rectangular, especially during the Qing dynasty, around 300 years ago. The beast became fully dragonized. It had a fierce dragon's head, a curly dragon's tail, and even tiny dragons carved into its body. The craftsmanship was breathtaking, ornate, refined, incredibly detailed. But for all that technical brilliance, many believe it lost the natural vitality and spirit of earlier designs. By this time, the creature was more commonly referred to as the Chiwen, or Dragon's Fire-Swallowing Son. It was said to be based on the ninth son of the Dragon King. Here is a fun and important piece of Chinese mythology you should know: the legend of the dragon's nine sons. In traditional Chinese culture, people imagine that dragons didn't just rule the skies. They had many magical children. And while the story is called Nine Sons of the Dragon, the number 9 doesn't literally mean just 9. It was the symbolic way of saying many unique types. Each of these dragon sons had their own distinct personality and talents. One loved music, another was incredibly strong. One liked to roar, another preferred silence and reflection. Over time, They became popular symbols in Chinese art, architecture, and decoration, each one representing a special meaning or purpose. Now, the one we are focusing on is the ninth sun, known as the Chiwen. Chiwen was believed to have a fiery appetite. Literally, he could swallow fire, smoke, and even summer rain, making him the perfect guardian against fire disasters. That's why, starting in ancient times, people began placing sculptures of Chiwen at both ends of the main ridge of important roofs, especially on imperial palaces and major temples. You often spot it biting down on the rooftop, dragon head raised, watching over the structure like a silent protector. But here is the catch. Back then, using a dragon motif wasn't allowed for just anyone. Dragon imagery was strictly reserved for the imperial family. In fact, using it without permission, that could cost you your life. So, Chiwen wasn't just a magical firefighting beast. It was a powerful symbol of status, law, and imperial authority. Think of it as the roof's badge of rank, letting you know exactly who lived inside without saying a word. And that brings us to an important question. How big was this Chiwen supposed to be? Well, here is the scene. Their size wasn't random at all. In fact, it was strictly determined by the building's status. Let's take a look at one of the most important architectural manuals in Chinese history, the 营造法式, a Song Dynasty text and the only surviving construction rulebook from that era. In it, there is a very clear regulation. The size of the Chiwen had to match the building's bay count. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly is a bay? In traditional Chinese architecture, a bay refers to the space between two upright columns. One bay equals one structural unit. And most buildings didn't just have bays along the front. They had them on the sides too. For example, if a building had 6 columns along the front, that means it has 5 bays in width. And if there are 5 columns along the side, it would have 4 bays in depth. So what does this mean? In short, the more bays, the higher the rank of the building. And since the Chiwen were symbols of status, their size had to be scaled up or down accordingly. In other words, the Chiwen served not only as protectors, but as status symbols built right into the roof design. According to the above Song Dynasty historical records and architectural charts, at the very top of the hierarchy were grand palaces with more than 9 bays and peripheral galleries. For these, the Chiwen could reach up to about 3 meters tall. Roofs with 7 bays could have a Chiwen as tall as 2.5 meters, while those with 3 bays maxed out at around 1.8 meters. Now, here is an important detail. These figures weren't universal across all dynasties. Different periods had their own standards. Take the whole supreme harmony in the Forbidden City, for example. It was rebuilt during the Qing dynasty, and by that time, both its structure and proportions had already diverged significantly from the Song dynasty's standards. So, when we look at these monuments from ancient manuals, we should see them as a reflection of that dynasty's ideas and system, rather than a strict rulebook for every period in Chinese history. Besides the number of bays, there is another important factor that affects the size of the Chiwen, the perimeter gallery. This refers to a full corridor or walkway that wraps around the outer edge of an important building, like what you are seeing here. It has its own set of columns and roof, forming a complete outer layer that stands apart from the main hall. These columns only support the weight of the outer eaves. not the main structure itself, but they add a whole new level of scale and complexity to the building. The presence of a premier gallery made the architecture appear more imposing and majestic, elevating its status. And naturally, the size of the Chiwen followed suit. The more grand the building, the bigger the Chiwen. So as you can see, these rooftop beasts weren't just decorative. Their size was the direct reflection of the building's rank, tied tightly to the Song dynasty's strict architectural codes. But here is the catch. Commoners loved these majestic rooftop beasts too. So what could they do about it? Well, clever craftsmen came up with creative alternatives. In southern China, traditional homes often featured a decorative owl crest, a sculpted ridge-end ornament inspired by the legendary owl fish, a turtle-like beast set to guard against misfortune and symbolize scholarly success. It also served to protect the home from evil spirits and bad luck. Some households went a step further, shaping colorful fish-like creatures out of clay and decorating them with glazed Thai chips in bright festive colors. Meanwhile, in northern China, like in Shanxi and Hebei province, another unique design emerged, the elephant trunk style. Its form was more structured and upright, echoing the values of formality and regional identity at the same time. In a way, this was ancient China's version of playing by the rules, but still keeping it beautiful. From the Chiwen, another variation evolved, known as the Wangshou. Unlike the Chiwen, which turns its mouth inward as if biting down on the ridge, the Wangshou usually features a dragon's head or a beast's face, with its mouth facing outward, often toward the east or west. This outward gaze symbolized vigilance from above, guarding the four directions and keeping watch over the land. You often find Wangshou placed at both ends of the main ridge on highly strategic buildings, such as city gates, watchtowers, and government offices, like Beijing's Deshengmen Era Tower and the Zhengyangmen Gate Tower. But here is the thing, just like with the Chiwen, the Wangshou also carried strict rules, especially during the Ming and Qing dynasties. From about 600 years ago until just a century ago, commoners weren't allowed to freely use dragon-shaped Wangshou, so local craftsmen came up with alternatives. In Shanxi province, for example, wealthy merchant families, like those of the Qiao and Wang courtyards, often replaced Wangshou with clay doves or roof tiles decorated with cloud motifs. These substitutions avoided royal imagery while still carrying the hope for protection, peace, and good fortune. By the way, if you ever visit Buddhist temples or Taoist monasteries in China, you might notice something special right in the middle of the main ridge, a round fire pole, flanked by coiling dragons or beast faces, forming the classic image of two dragons playing with a pole. Often, a surprise pearl was inserted into the center of the pole, symbolizing divine protection. Now, this dragon, remember, it's a water creature, was believed to hold a secret weapon in its mouth, the so-called fire-repelling pearl. Ancient people thought it had the power to extinguish flames. But did it really work? Well, history says otherwise. Between the Ming and Qing dynasties, the Forbidden City alone suffered 73 fires, and the most important hall, the Hall of Supreme Harmony, was destroyed by fire 4 different times. So, in reality, the pearl didn't have any magical effect. Instead, it was more of a spiritual symbol, a wish for peace and safety. And here is another interesting detail. The size of the fire pearl was closely tied to a building's rank. According to the Song Dynasty architectural manual, 营造法式, the higher the status of the building, the larger the pearl. sometimes reaching up to 84 centimeters across. So, we have now covered the gardens of the main ridge, from the dragon-shaped Chiwen, reserved for royalty, to the creative folk variations that carried people's hopes and wishes. Already, we can see how roof decorations reflected both hierarchy and imagination. But the story doesn't end there. These ideas continued in an even richer way along the slanting ridges of the roof, what we call the 垂直 in Chinese. Don't underestimate these slanting ridges. They are home to an entire battle formation of roof beasts, each with its own function and symbolism. And leading this procession is a truly eye-catching figure, a woman riding on the back of a phoenix. Her image is both mysterious and sacred. Her name changed over time. Back in the Song dynasty, more than 1,000 years ago, she was called the Phoenix Riding Lady. By the Qing dynasty, around 300 years ago, people referred to her as the immortal riding a phoenix. Now, her practical role was simple: to secure the very first tile on the side ridge. But her original story goes much deeper. Scholars trace her imagery back to Garuda, the half-human, half-bird deity from Indian Buddhism. And of course, countless folk legends have also sprung up around her. One popular legend says his image came from an ancient king. Obsessed with war and having made too many enemies, he faced the downfall of his kingdom, but just at the critical moment, a phoenix rescued him, carrying him away from danger. Later generations turned this story into the figure of a rider on a phoenix, placed at the very edge of the slanting ridge, suspended between peril and safety, symbolizing the hope of turning misfortune into blessing and disaster into peace. Another story takes a very different angle. According to this tale, the rider was once an ambitious official who dreamed of climbing endlessly high in rank and wealth. But a wise man warned him, "You have already reached the peak. Any step higher, and you will fall." So people set his image on the edge of the ridge, as if frozen at the top, to remind everyone that ambition must have limits. It was a visual warning: know when to stop, and be content with where you stand. Right behind the phoenix rider comes a whole lineup of smaller beasts. Back in the Song dynasty, around 1,000 years ago, they were called squatting beasts. By the Ming and Qing dynasties, roughly 600 to 400 years ago, they were known as walking beasts or little runners. At first, these creatures had a very practical purpose: pressing down the tiles and securing the eaves. But over time, their numbers and arrangement became a powerful status symbol. The higher the rank of the building, the more beasts you would see. And there is only one building in all of China allowed to display 10 of them. The whole supreme harmony at the heart of Beijing's Forbidden City. This was the emperor's stronghold, the very peak of imperial power. Now, let's meet the lineup, each one full of meaning. First comes the dragon, summoning wind and rain, the true embodiment of the emperor himself. Next is the phoenix, wings spread wide, symbolizing peace and prosperity, so majestic that even all other birds must bow. Then the lion, eyes blazing, a Buddhist guardian who protects the palace day and night. The heavenly horse gallops behind, embodying the emperor's ambition to expand his realm. And from the waves charges the seahorse, loyal, courageous, and said to guard the throne for eternity. But the procession doesn't stop there. Here comes the Suanni, one of the dragon's 9 sons, famous for devouring smoke and flames, keeping the palace safe from fire. His partner is the Yayu, a sea creature whose sweeping tail can summon storms to put out any blaze. Next stands is the one-horned Xie, a creature of absolute integrity, able to distinguish right from wrong, an external symbol of justice. Then, the mighty fighting bull, said to calm floods and ward off disasters, so powerful that even raging waters must retreat. And finally, the most mysterious of them all, the Hangshi, with the face of a sun god and a Vajra weapon in hand. Its true identity has never been certain. Some believe it is the incarnation of legends, the master of thunder and lightning. Others see it as Garuda, the great golden-winged bird of Buddhist lore, known in Journey to the West as the Formidable Rock. Either way, only the Hall of Supreme Harmony was deemed worthy to host this ultimate garden. The lineup of roof beasts also followed strict rules, with just a couple of exceptions like the Heavenly Horse and Seahorse, or the Suanni and Yayu, which could swap places. The order of the others could never be changed. And aside from the Hall of Supreme Harmony, no other buildings were allowed to have more than 9 beasts, the number always to be odd, usually 1, 3, 5, 7, or 9. When the count was reduced, it was always done from the back of the line. First the Hangshi would go, then the fighting bull, and so on. For example, the emperor's own sleeping palace, the palace of heavenly purity, and the hall of preserving harmony, where the highest imperial exams were held, each carried 9 beasts. The emperor's residence, the palace of earthly tranquility, and the hall of central harmony had 7. Palaces once occupied by the mothers of emperors, like the palace of benevolent tranquility, had 5. Smaller palaces or audience halls might have only 3 or even just 1. So next time you visit a Chinese palace or temple, look up at the ridge and count the little creatures. The more beasts you see, the higher the status of the beauty. And finally, at the very end of the slanting ridge, you will find the Cui Shou, the hip ridge beast. It may be easy to overlook, but in fact is one of the most important pieces of entire roof. Hidden inside is often an iron nail, securing the last slanting ridge tiles in place and keeping them from sliding off. In other words, it's like the safety screw of the roof. Its shape is usually a dragon's head, ox horns, or some other fierce-looking creature. So, while it serves a very practical function, it also carries the meaning of warding off evil and protecting the building. And just with the other roof ornaments, size mattered according to the Yingzao Fashi, the Song dynasty's great architectural manual written about 1,000 years ago. The height of the Cui Shou was determined by the number of tile layers on the main ridge. The more layers, the higher the status, and the taller the beast. For the grandest buildings, the Cui Shou could reach about 126 centimeters tall, while for the lowest ranked, it might be just 40 centimeters high. Here is an important detail to note. If the roof is a hip and gable style, the slanting ridge won't have a squatting beast or the phoenix rider. Only a single Cui Shou sits at the very tip of the ridge. But on a diagonal ridge, the short sloping ridges extending from a hip and gable roof, you can see the full lineup, the phoenix rider, the walking beasts, and the Cui Shou all arranged in a complete mystical formation. For example, the roof of the Palace of Benevolent Tranquility clearly shows this setup. There is also another type of beast with a row similar to the Cui Shou, but placed on the diagonal ridge, the Qiang Shou. The diagonal ridges extend toward the corners of the roof and are structurally vulnerable, easily buffeted by wind. The Qiang Shou is installed in these critical spots, serving both to stabilize the tiles and to ward off evil spirits. Its prototype is said to be the dragon's third son, Chaofeng, a fierce creature that likes to stand high and face the wind, perfect for patrolling the corners from above. So along the entire slanting ridge, from the phoenix rider at the front to the line of walking beasts in the middle, and all the way to the Cui Shou at the tip, complemented by the corner Qiang Shou at the diagonal ridges, the roof forms a ceremonial skyward god. These rooftop gardens not only showcase the aesthetic principle of rank determines decoration in ancient Chinese architecture, but also embody the craftsmanship, wisdom, and cultural spirit of the builders. Beyond the prominent beasts on the main and side ridges, there is another, much more subtle type of garden, the taoshou, or protective beast. They are usually found on the very outermost beams of the eaves, called the zaijiao beams, because the beam tips stick up. They are the first to be battered by rain and moisture. To solve this problem, ancient builders invented a hollow, tile-based cover, the taoshou, that fits over the end of the wooden beam. It blocks water and slows decay, essentially acting as the armor of the timber structure. A famous example is the Tang Dynasty taoshou at Foguang Temple in Shanxi province, which has protected the wooden beams for over 1,200 years. By the Ming and Qing dynasties, the shapes and use of taoshou were strictly regulated. As we mentioned before, dragon-shaped taoshou were reserved for the royal family. Commoners could only use beast faces or fish forms, and breaking this rule could even carry the death penalty. Material and design also reflected rank and region. Royal palaces often use glazed tiles or gilded bronze. In the Tang Dynasty, they took the form of mojiyu, one kind of mystical fish. And by the Ming and Qing dynasties, they were dragon heads. Temples and government offices used gray or unglazed ceramic with simplified dragon heads or beast faces. In southern Jiangnan homes, craftsmen carved cedar wood and coated it with tung oil, making carp or fish or similar aquatic figures. In southern Fujian ancestral halls, taoshou were more decorative, often inlaid with colored porcelain and shaped like lions playing with a ball. Most of these creatures are water beasts, reflecting the ancient belief of using water to control fire. They also demonstrate the ingenious approach of encasing wood to prolong the life of timber structure, a perfect combination of practicality and symbolism. So next time you look up at the corners of an ancient building's eaves, pay attention to those quiet taoshou gently holding the beam ends. They are not just protective components. They are like cultural time capsules, carrying the collective wisdom of generations who battled time and the elements. By now, I hope you can truly feel that all these tiny roof beasts aren't mere decorations. They serve practical purpose, while also embodying ancient Chinese understanding of nature, respect for hierarchy, and devotion to the divine. As the renowned architect Liang Sicheng once said, they transform what would otherwise be clumsy and mundane structural parts into a beautiful crown for the entire building. In the future, when you visit an ancient structure, take a moment to count them, observe them, the roof beasts. What you see isn't just an ornamental tiles, it's a coded message etched into the architecture, a window connecting us with the past. Don't forget to subscribe. Next time, we'll explore how to identify ancient Chinese buildings from different dynasties. See you in the world of historic architecture.